Hello, everyone. This is the first podcast of Global Markets Association. I'm one of your hosts, Athargrad Jain. I'm a third-year student in University of Toronto studying business strategy, and I'm very interested in entrepreneurship and private equity.
I'm Kirtiman. I'm also a co-president in GMA, and I'm here at UFT studying finance.
We are here today with Professor McConkey. Can you please introduce yourself?
Sure, thanks. And thanks for having me so much. Very excited, especially with the inaugural
Pleasure's all
event.
ours.
Wow, fantastic. So I am Professor Bill McConkey, Associate Professor Teaching here at UTSC in our beloved Department of Management, focused in strategy and entrepreneurship.
That's amazing. And just a little bit of background on us as well. We are Global Markets Association, a club catering to consulting and finance, so bringing together the intersection of both. So, Bill McConkey students might know he is quite fond of entrepreneurship and has had quite a few ventures of his own as well. So, can you tell us why did you choose entrepreneurship?
Well, it's an interesting question. Perhaps it chose me.
Oh,
Might be the truer answer. A lot of people when they are entrepreneurs, they didn't necessarily have that identity, and in fact, traditionally people who entered new markets with their own new ventures, more often than not, were already industry players. They worked for a big company, they got to know that industry, and then were the types and had the opportunities to see where things were not working so well in an industry, and thought that they could be part of the solution. And I suppose that kind of was the case with me. So I did not start, right out of school, my own company.
yeah.
Over time, I got comfortable with entrepreneurship. There were nice stages for me. Big tech, where I was anything but the entrepreneur, the
Yeah.
founder. In fact, when I first left school, I went to IBM, and I counted one day 11 layers of management between myself and the president. 11
That's
layers.
Yeah.
It's crazy. But then jumped to small tech before then being the absolute founder myself on a few companies subsequent. So it was a real kind of journey to becoming an entrepreneur.
That makes sense. So you would say that your experience before entrepreneurship shaped you into the entrepreneur which you are today.
Yeah, there's no question. And I have taught lots and lots of students over the 26 years I've been associated with the program. And I've seen all kinds of flavors of entrepreneurs, come through our ranks. And I was never one of those ones that there's a group of incredible young people I've taught who, I didn't always see them in class, let's put it this way. They're busy already building their businesses. And they're 18, 19, 20, 21 years old, like unbelievable.
Yeah.
Many of whom went on to really succeed and do great things and employ lots of great people and do great things for their markets, their customers. And I was not that person. I thought, frankly, I'd be more on the academic side. And in fact, I studied at Scarborough here at UTSC. We used to call it Scarborough College. All my family went here. We were Markham people, so This was our place for undergrad. And I was the only science student in my family. In fact, our beloved Michael Krasinski, Professor Emeritus, well, he's still here teaching, so I guess he's not quite emeritus yet. He taught my oldest brother in economics here at the campus. Incredible. What a lovely story. And still here doing great things. But I was a science student, and I went all over the place within sciences. I started off in astronomy and physics and migrated to neuroscience and psychology. In the meantime, did a bunch of other things. And when I graduated, I still really didn't know what to do. And so it was an MBA.
Yeah.
We went ahead and did an MBA. And I started getting a sense that I wasn't going to be a scientist.
Yeah.
But I wanted to be a businessman in the scientific realm, so to speak, developing applications through technology that then served markets.
Right.
And that became the trajectory. Yeah.
Okay. So when you were working at IBM,
Mm-hmm.
did you go in knowing that you were going to have your own business, or did it?
I didn't. So that's pretty neat. I'd say this. I only spent 3 years there. My older brothers were there much longer. Real family connection to IBM. which is also kind of a neat thing because, really quickly, my great-grandfather had founded a typewriter company in the early 1900s called Underwood Canada. And if you know me and if you come to the bridge or if you see me come to my office, you'll see some of my collection of antique Canadian IT, including these typewriters.
I always wondered what were those.
Yeah. And I've got other things in the world of telephony and radio communications and stuff from Northern Electric and from Research in Motion and Techlogics. So I collect this, I write about some of this stuff. Back to IBM, I was really just growing up in industry. So I didn't have the luxury of co-op, which is such a lovely thing that this campus does so well for so many students. I didn't have that luxury. So the 3 years at IBM, frankly, just grew me up. Got rid of a bit of the green behind the ears, as we say. And I developed in me some confidence, how to operate as a professional, how to get things done, how to negotiate, solutions with people and help to manage teams and satisfy customers. And then after those 3 years, I had the great fortune of joining an early stage company. So it wasn't my founding, but it was an early stage company, Mobile Computing Corp, out of the Toronto area. They were building kind of customized mobile solutions for trucking.
Interesting.
And I spent the 90s at that company and grew through the ranks, got a taste of stock, got a taste of defining my own job, got a taste of traveling the world, and starting to make bigger and more important decisions as I grew through those ranks. And also met some of my future business partners. So I grew up even further. I started seeing myself, identifying myself as maybe a business founder through that process. Started really understanding more and more the notion of value creation, serving markets, and really creating from scratch, not just implementing someone else's business model. And so by the end of the 90s, a bunch of us cashed out of that business. There was a changing of the management guard, which was, I think, very healthy, And in the early 2000s, became part of a few different early stage ventures, and that kind of led me onto that trajectory of this thing we're calling entrepreneur.
That's very interesting, and that brings a very important point in my mind, because if we look at our parents, if we look at you've had a quite interesting journey where you started off as IBM and then you moved to Venture 1, Venture 2, and all that stuff. These days, there is a catastrophic shift, I would say, because, not catastrophic, that's the wrong word. I would say there's a dramatic shift where there are young people in their 20s, people in their late teens who are starting businesses. They want to become entrepreneur right inside university and right after university.
Right.
What do you think of that?
Well, I think there are a lot of things to think about it. Good, bad, and indifferent. So it's just an amazing phenomenon. I'll throw out kind of the cautionary response first, before I backfill with some optimism. There is, I'd like to see some more economic analysis of this personally, but I suspect that there's this notion that entrepreneurship is easier than ever before. And why would that be? Because culturally it's become more acceptable, because there are support programs such as the Bridge here at UTSC and Sam Ibrahim Cecile, and all the other incubators and accelerators even at U of T. There's 9 or 10 more, at the other campuses, not to mention so many others even just here in Southern Ontario, let alone around the world. So there's all that support. There has been, of course, the development of the venture capital industry over the last several decades. And then the big thing, technology, information technology. So where the cost of startup has dramatically reduced if you're producing a digital product, right? That gives the sense that entrepreneurship is probably easier than ever before. What I would say is barriers to entry have dropped dramatically. Right? But when you think about that, that also might imply that there's a lot more competition than ever before. So developing this notion of product market fit, gathering the necessary resources having the right resilience, wisdom, judgment, other skills. All these things are absolutely critical because you now have all of these other competitors. And in fact, I have the luxury of meeting with so many young people, pretty much every week coming into my office with a new idea.
Yeah.
And I'm just thrilled that they're doing that. And then I sometimes, more than sometimes, need to feed into their thinking that, there's a lot of other people doing something really similar.
Yeah.
Really similar. And if I know about some of them, there must be dozens more around the world. And from any country, that could probably compete with you, right?
Yeah.
The world is like that these days. So it means it's great that there's opportunity. It's great that there's support. And I think more than ever, you got to do your homework. You got to be ready to put in the hours.
Right.
You got to figure out how to compete, adjust, learn, and serve markets. That doesn't go away. That doesn't go away. Yeah.
So I would say it's like two opposite forces.
Yeah.
We just have to determine which one would come out on top. On one side, competition's increasing. It's more important than ever before to do your research and to get it actually right than just having wrong research. And on the other hand, there are tools which are making businesses easier.
Yep.
And maybe managing those easier. But again, competition is severe and we need to balance it out.
That's it. I think it's as simple as that.
That's perfect.
Yeah.
So tell me this. If you want an entrepreneur right now, what would you be? So if I, and again, I think for the listeners, I think they'll understand that I'm still involved in industry, more of a back seat to the businesses that I have helped co-found over the years, while I'm teaching this stuff. Yes. So I'm full-time on at the university, creating content, teaching courses, supporting programs like the New Venture program at the Bridge and the African Impact Challenge and others. But I do sit on the boards of some of these companies that I've been part of, as well as some past alumni, and I'm on a few of their boards as well. So if I weren't doing all that, both in the teaching and the board work and the more, the past operational kind of stuff with the startup world, it's kind of funny. I came from a very athletic family. Oh, really?
Played tennis every day of my life for years. Always thought that, I'd like to do something in sports. But then check this out. Love music. Yeah. Love playing. Right now, redesigning my basement to be more of a music space.
Okay.
Yeah.
Fascinating.
It is. And, I have 5 kids. I told you I came from a family of 5. We all went to UTSC.
Yeah.
I have 5 of my own.
Yeah.
I mean, my wife had a little something to do with it. They're all incredibly musical, So I'd love to be leaning into that world too. And then I told you, I was an undergrad science student. I still have great fascination in many areas of science. So I guess the answer is that I'm a real mess. If entrepreneurship didn't find me and pick me, I'd have no clue what to do with my life. Because I have an awful lot of fun interests.
Maybe you can have your own musician family like Jackson's or something.
Well said. Well said. Here's hoping. Yeah.
So you've been an entrepreneur for a pretty long time, and you've taught other students who went on to become entrepreneurs. What's the most common mistake that you see young entrepreneurs or business owners make?
Yeah, that's great. Sometimes people can kind of pretend that gravity doesn't exist, but it turns out it does.
Well said.
Yeah. And so there are just there's some things that, and I teach this in my consumer behavior class. There's some things about humanity, human existence, the planet, whatever, our existence. There's some things that are fundamentally in a changeable mode. And then there's some things that aren't.
Yes.
And knowing that line is part of being a wise person, I think.
Okay.
Right? So for instance, back to the consumer behavior stuff, the marketing courses that I teach, Of course, like social media didn't exist a little while ago.
Yeah.
Websites, a variety of things just didn't. So adapting our tactics, our methodologies, our techniques,
Yeah.
even our creative strategies, things like that, of course, it needs to happen.
Yeah.
Right? But a lot of features of the human character, of human capacity, of our sensory capacities, and a variety of other things, our cognitive, paradigms, they're not really all that changing.
Yeah.
And so if we pretend, oh no, you throw everything out, it's like, okay, that was just at best lazy.
Yeah.
If you just throw everything out, go, no, it's all new, no, some things are new. And constantly, and I do this thing, I'm constantly saying to myself, I can always divide any topic pretty much in, not necessarily half, but in two pieces.
Yeah.
What's changing, what isn't.
Yeah.
And that's a really cool kind of methodology. And so back to the question in founders, sometimes founders think that they don't need to work hard. I've heard, some have come to my office and say, yeah, it's all about, you know what? I figured it out. My business model, passive income. And inside I'm going, just leave. Externally I'm going, okay, sit down. We got to talk. Right? Sometimes founders don't recognize the importance of learning and developing good process.
Yeah.
The ones, it's really neat. So many of these amazing young people that I've, had some capacity to support, invariably they'll often talk about good process. Yeah. And that they learned good process. It matters how I do business development, or how I procure inputs, or how I do market analysis. Yeah. There's better process and there's worse process, and it matters. Right. So sometimes some of the people I've noticed that don't lean into that good process notion. Yes. They think they can take shortcuts. They think whatever. Ultimately, a lot of people these days, I like the expression because a lot of my most successful alumni use the expression, but this notion of product market fit. Yeah. Yeah. If you're not trying to do the work to analyze, if you're not trying to assess and be ready to change and adapt, you might be in trouble. Okay. Toward developing product market fit. And we developed this notion called the concentric circle model about, it's just an imagery of at the center is just your initial untested hypothesis. Yeah. And imagine not having a good process to test that and improve that and develop that. Yeah. Right? I mean, why on earth would you imagine your first hypothesis of a product in a market who cares about that product would be perfect? Yeah. Like why? I can't imagine why. And so if you're stuck with that and not developing a good process to test, evaluate, improve, and keep doing it over and over again, then you might be in trouble. And so I've seen that also as some of the mistakes some of the people might make at times. Yeah.
That's very interesting. You bring two very important components of a perfect pie, I would say. There's frequency, there's hard work, which you must always do, and then there's good process. Mm-hmm. What I want to know is, do you think hard work can ever compensate for not having a good process?
Wow, that's interesting. I suppose it's possible. Yeah. A lot of things are possible. Yeah. I think it's possible to just get lucky. Yeah. First idea, no rigor, no testing, whatever, get it out there and you sell 1 trillion units. Yeah. I'm sure it happens. I think it's just less likely. Yeah, that makes sense. And the same, so too with this. I think if you don't have a combination of resilient, hard work, effort, just getting it done, and developing and improving your process, I think you're just starting to limit your capacity and making it just less likely that you are going to succeed.
That makes sense. And I guess that plays into the notion that hard work will always beat talent if talent is not working hard.
Yeah, I think so. I think so. That's pretty good.
Let's move on to AI. So AI has been always a massive global shift right now. People are saying it's a new era. It's a new internet, basically. Yeah. We're seeing many startups in the AI space. There's companies creating devices to basically do everything a founder is supposed to, like CloudBot. I don't know if you've heard of CloudBot.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. So people are concerned that eventually AI is going to replace almost all the jobs out there.
Well, I heard this tune the other night. Old MacDonald lost his farm. A-I-A-I-O. Okay, that was just silly. Yeah.
So many people are concerned that AI is going to take over lots of jobs.
Mm-hmm.
How likely do you think it is that AI would reach that extent, that people don't have jobs anymore?
Yeah, it's pretty cool. And in my innovation class last night, I had a world-class expert in AI and quantitative sciences, Professor Shreyas Sekar. And we were having that very question asked, among others. And it was a really rich discussion, and we had the students engaged in this. And, you know, on the one hand, of course, how do I know?
Yep.
On the other hand, what are some interesting ways of examining the question? And I think that's kind of cool.
Yeah.
On the one hand, on yet another of the one hand, sorry, but, you know, I've lived through a number of tech tidal waves.
Yeah.
I remember where I was in Silicon Valley as the 2000, the millennial tech bubble burst, as we were doing actually a fundraise, and we were doing our dog and ponies. And what was really interesting, you know, I remember my partner and I were out there, and we were in San Jose, and there was this big sign, and people were coming out of this building, and it says the Google Developers Conference. And I looked at it and I said, what's a Google? I mean, what's a Google? Can you imagine anyone saying that today?
Yeah.
And, you know, at the time, we were, so we had written a business concept up, and we were farming it around. And I think it was a great concept, probably not the right timing, separate from the investor bubble bursting. But the thing that I found really interesting was, you know, learning that, there's always, you know, these tech tidal waves. Like, that's the nature of, you know, creative destruction.
Yeah.
You know, to quote Yusuf Schumpeter from many, many years ago. And, you know, it's kind of the nature of entrepreneurship and of economic evolution to have a non-linear kind of, you know, evolutionary path. And so we saw this huge one in 2000, this burst, and then investment drying up. Well, it kind of made sense that some of this burst, I was seeing some of the things that we're getting invested in.
Yeah.
Crazy things, just crazy. And fear of loss was everywhere.
Right.
So can't miss out. Gotta invest just in case. This is a big one, right? And a lot of them were dogs.
Yeah.
And so it dried up. A lot of these little things went belly up, and then took a few years of recovery. And then the best of those investments and those technologies remained. And they helped to reshape, you know, the landscape for working and living for the next decade or so. Until the next one happened, you know, so we had internet, and then we had mobile systems, and, you know, more recently blockchain, and now here we are with AI. Some think this is just the next thing, and we're going to have an overhang, we're going to have a bit of a collision with reality, and then the same kind of curve will present itself that we've been seeing. Others think AI is a little different. It's a little more ubiquitous impact, good, bad, and other.
Yeah.
So that it's hard to measure it compared to what we've seen in the past. The time series does not indicate the future, so to speak.
Wow.
Yeah, so I find it's interesting, and I don't really have a real answer. The only thing I would say is perhaps we might see that AI does a faster job of kind of turning the jobs into more of the job of the intellect and the heart of the human.
Yeah. Right.
Right? That deep understanding and caring that electrons still have a hard time doing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that some of those other jobs will go their new way. Go away, I should say, whereas the human character and spirit and deepest creativity will then be applied in managing all that stuff in new business models that we don't even know today.
Right.
So here's hoping.
That makes sense, and that brings me to a really interesting point, because I know there are 19-year-olds, 20-year-olds out there who are grinding right now to go into McKinsey one day,
right,
or maybe become a private equity investor one day, or go into investment banking. And for them, it's very difficult to scroll LinkedIn and not find a post which says that AI just killed McKinsey or something like
Yeah.
that. So do you actually think that AI is gonna kill consulting firms or something like that? Because today you can just do all your market research with AI. The other day I came to you and I had like a 40-page report about a potential business model, and it was entirely created by AI. So do you think AI will actually kill McKinsey and all? And these students which are grinding so hard, they should just stop grinding about it?
Well, I suppose I go back to that comment I made just a minute ago. I don't think it's going to kill the McKinseys. I think it's going to change them. Yeah. It's my guess.
Right.
When we look at physical AI or we look at the next generation manufacturing, there's data and there's other things that, again, AI is just going to do for us.
Yes.
And so some of those roles, as we plan out the next version of manufacturing or the next version of service delivery mechanisms, as we plan these things out, there's just some things that we don't need people doing, and AI is going to do it even better. And then there's going to be some things that, as a result of that, it's just the way the creative process works on this planet, I think. And we amazing creatures called humans, we then build on top of whatever we got in front of us. And I think that's still going to be the case. So I think the consulting world is going to evolve. And I think it's going to use AI dramatically. For instance, it might be the ones that say, here are the guardrails to build into your own AI. As we consult with big firms around the world. They know they need to use AI to stay efficient, stay competitive. But they also know the liability. They also know the risk of, not just hallucination, but all kinds of other places where AI makes horrible judgment. So figuring out the guardrails, the policies, structuring the AI platforms that will be mixtures perhaps of very large language models and very public data along with very private data, and how to manage the authority paths and also the access and other issues related to the secrecy of some of that data. Right. I think the McKinseys will find their new home, let's say.
Yeah, and I think that brings the importance of the point you just mentioned about the importance of human heart, because I guess McKinsey's are going to use AI to crunch the numbers, but I'm pretty sure ChatGPT won't go to a client side to tell an entrepreneur how to run their business.
Right. Very good.
That makes sense.
Very good.
How would you say AI is changing the way entrepreneurs are running their businesses? Because let's say if I want to do a startup, not too long ago, I would have to research, scour the internet, find out all about the industry. Right now, I can just go on ChatGPT. It'll give me all the statistics for the industry. So how would you say that is shaping new founders and entrepreneurs who want to start their own business?
Right. Well, I mean, if you look at the value chain of the startup, early on, I'm sure it's helping write business plans, doing this statistical analysis, the market crunch, data crunching, stuff like that you just mentioned. Imagine you're in business now, you're in market, and you're a very early stage company. I am very much just seeing this with many of the companies that I'm supporting. There's the two places where it's very much in operation. One is in the creation of the product or service, right? The design and that sort of thing, and that's very interesting. And then the other one, of course, is in the operation. And that's almost, they're calling this just the obvious low-hanging fruit. So a lot of startups who, for instance, if they have products and they have product descriptions or they have all kinds of other things online for purchase, they're using AI to model this stuff. They're no longer actually hiring models at a few $100s an hour to actually wear the stuff, have a shoot, have a photographer, have all of this very expensive overhead. AI is doing it all now. We have a startup that came out of the bridge that has been writing product descriptions for big retailers who have imagine you have thousands of SKUs and those are changing weekly, right? That's a lot of work, and her startup is writing all those and doing even more product analysis using AI. So there's an awful lot of opportunity for AI to support more efficient operations. There's also the opportunity to actually be envisioning and helping to build that next product.
That makes sense. So, broadly speaking, I can see how AI is facilitating businesses, but it's also disrupting some businesses. Like, for example, if many businesses went extinct because of AI, many business models, because AI can just do it for so cheap. So, for example, ghostwriting used to be a very popular thing, but
Right.
I think a lot of them have just moved out of the industry because of ChatGPT per se. So, what would you say are the best industries for entrepreneurs to go into now with the advent of AI? Because the only one I can think of is manufacturing, because I'm pretty sure manufacturing is still going to happen.
Yeah, it's true. Although, those smart robots, you got to watch them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
As long as you own them, that's fine.
It's true. Well, there you go.
Yeah.
There's always going to be a need to produce things, and you just have to reassess the value chain. So again, as you just said, if you go to some of these wonderful, like Toyota here in Cambridge or Honda just north of here, these are very automated manufacturing plants and assembly plants. And so they still have lots of humans, but the output is much more extraordinary, both in terms of pure volume and its flexibility by virtue of physical AI. And it's really amazing to watch. Better products, faster turnaround, more flexible change ups on the manufacturing itself. They can do one line here, another line of product over there, and switch that up for tomorrow. So if you just follow, we used to say follow the money, right? When in finance, but if you just follow the value, you see that there's still going to be a need to do stuff, right? Whether it's build the robots, or program the robots, or evaluate different features about the robots, or maybe it's about supporting the robots. There's always going to be something like robots that break down, right? So if you just track that in any industry, you'll see that there's probably always just new value chains being created or demanded, at least, that need to be developed.
Yeah, that makes sense. I personally see it as AI is not going to replace businesses. It's going to replace the ones which never should have been businesses in the first place.
Perhaps, or just had their time and they've run out of time. Yeah.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
I have one question from you. You are a very eloquent speaker. So, are you good at sales? And if yes, then I know for a fact that there are many people out there who just don't have the confidence to go and sell something, whether it is on call, whether it is in person. Is there any alternative to being good at sales?
Oh, that's neat. Well, sales obviously is so important, so I'm glad you raised it. I'd say I'm good, but not great.
Understatement.
I've seen great.
Yeah. Okay.
I have a brother who's great. I've worked with other people who are great.
Yeah.
And so it begs the question, well, what is the package? What's necessary to be successful in sales? And I think together we could figure out all those adjectives that describe a great salesperson, right? Sometimes it's just initiative, resilience. Sometimes, certainly, there's a cognitive dimension, articulating a successful influence strategy in your brain. And I even teach some of this again in some of my courses. Getting people, getting their attention, keeping their attention, focusing on what they care about, right? And then having both, I'd say, patience and resilience to go through the objection handling, because, really, you have to figure out if this is right for you. It's one thing that I know my product and like my product, and that's good enough for selling to my mother because she loves me. But I got to make sure that you see it as a solution to something you're dealing with. And so understanding it, so there's a cognitive dimension to great selling, but there's also interpersonal stuff, and there's patience and resilience and all these sorts of things. And then ultimately, and some of these people, you just see they just have the drive. They just will not accept no. And it doesn't mean they're forcing yes on you. The good ones have the drive and the great process. And it's really great to watch. It's lovely to watch someone who has all of those firing just so perfectly.
So would you say it is a skill that you can build up over time, or is it something that comes naturally to?
Yeah, so I suspect both. So anecdotally, from all the people I've worked with, some seem to be born salespeople.
Right.
Yes, I think that phenomenon exists. And to be the best, you also have to work at it, develop the right skills, probably through some training, through some practice, through some failures. Mm-hmm. And the best of the best, just like the best hockey players. I mean, Connor McDavid has some beautiful, wonderful natural skill.
Yes.
Yeah.
And look at the training clearly that's gone into all that as well.
Yeah.
That's how you get to be the best.
That makes sense.
Both.
And I remember from one of your classes that very important thing about sales is to make the other person care about your product.
Yeah.
And one of the ways to do that is by building credibility, or
right.
at least perceived credibility. But the problem is a lot of students, they want to go into businesses like private equity or consulting. I'm very interested in private equity. I would love to open my own shop one day,
yep.
or I would love to have a consulting firm one day.
Yep.
But these businesses, they're really dominated by people who have decades and decades
yes.
of experience and credibility.
That's right.
Is there any way for young people like me and potentially many others to bridge that gap?
No, just go home.
Okay.
Okay, maybe.
Okay.
So first of all, I think there's just a reasonable thing that says experience means you're more likely a little more wise than the next person.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Experience just matters.
Yes.
Because it really does build perspective. I remember coming out of my MBA, finally learning the time value of money.
Yeah.
Thinking that everything is solved by just doing a good NPV calculation. And I realized I must have sounded like an idiot in some of the meetings, like seriously. So perspective. You gain perspective with experience. You gain perspective with difficulty. Yeah. You gain perspective by listening and being guided nicely with other people. You gain perspective through life. And so it's just one of those things that's kind of hard to collapse and say it's not necessary.
Right.
So there's natural skill, there is trained skill. You two could both have those. So that's critical.
Okay.
Right? If you didn't have those two things, the experience of years might not develop you as much. I suspect that's true. There'd probably be some kind of curve, right? Without the initial skill or interest or other things about you personally, and then without that training from a great program like ours, the experience itself either doesn't get you there or gets you on a very slower curve to whatever there is. Yeah. The credibility. So I think they're all part of the recipe for success. Mm-hmm. What I do think is that with the right skill and the right attitudes and things like that, you can just accelerate. I do think that with the right things that you're doing now, and some of you guys are doing such amazing things, I think you're speeding up your process. Right. The experience matters, but you might not need 20 years. Yeah. You might have in 5 or 6 years, you might have enough of what it takes to go out and start your own biz.
That makes sense. And I think that younger people, they have the tendency to think that they know more than the people who came before. But I feel that everyone around us, including young people, old people, we all are exceptionally unaware of how little we know. So I think that also plays a little into it.
I suspect so too. Yeah. And again, just experience is experience.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
You said about how we could achieve the same thing in less time now.
Yeah.
There's two conflicting opinions in the business space. I'd say one of them is that speed matters the most. You should go out, do multiple things as quick as possible, fail so you can learn. And the other one is do one thing but do it perfectly, regardless of how long it takes. What's your view on that? What is the right approach?
Oh, that's really cool. Thank you. That's a wonderful, almost dichotomy, isn't it? I can see merit in both, and I think you have the opportunity to experience both as a human being. Yeah. So, for instance, whether it's Karate Kid or other great cultural examples of this, teaching someone and developing in yourself the capacity for excellence, that's a great thing.
Yes.
Yeah. my mother became an extraordinary artist, in part because her beloved art teacher, a nun, about 100 years ago, back when my mom was a little girl, would, they respected each other. She loved her, but she'd say, Molly, no, you're going to do this all over again, and just would wipe it clean. Like, she didn't say, oh, look at this, isn't that great, isn't that beautiful? She didn't. She, in a very loving way, she said, no, you're going to start again. That did not look like the face that you were trying to, right? And my mom really appreciated that, right? So there's something about striving for excellence, okay? But then there's another thing in human life that also matters, and that is learning, growing, and deciding how to trade off things.
Yeah.
So striving for excellence doesn't mean this notion of absolute perfectionism.
Yes.
I think it is true that striving for perfect sometimes just gets in the way of getting the right thing done, a good thing done that would create value right away. So, no wonder, on the one hand, helping people develop a notion of excellence, matters. But at the same time, I very much teach in a product development. I very much teach agile development and the notion of focusing on the most important thing and have iterations of getting it out there fast.
Right.
Quick feedback, quick development cycles, get it out, and make a decision that this needs to go to market now, because the most important thing is good enough.
Right.
And other development places, Google and others, have said the same thing. Whether it was the Chrome browser or other things they've worked on, we fixed a really important problem. Let's not wait another 3 years to perfect it in some way that we don't even know what that means.
Right.
Get it out there, create value, then get more feedback that is really fixing a real problem, and now we want you to do other things. Great, do it. So they live in harmony, I think.
Okay.
And really can support each other, believe it or not.
That makes sense. The way I see it is, get something started and make sure you're not over contemplating, is this good, should we get it out, nah, maybe we should perfect it a little more. I think we should just get it out, and on the way perfection would be achieved as we are speeding through things.
Yeah, sure. And just keep making sure you're getting the right feedback on that pathway.
Right.
Again, going back to the right processes.
Right, well said. Exactly right.
Also, it also depends on what the product is. So, for example, if you're making something for the medical industry, it's probably more important that you get your product right.
Sure.
Instead of
well said. Well said. I can't agree with you more. Yeah, than some other IT products that, it's okay if this fails around here, but and thank God we have in those mission critical and very, life and death kind of industries, we have gold standard approaches. We have people verifying that things are, whether it's drugs or medical devices or things like that, there's the agencies are there to test them and give type approval and things like that. Yeah.
Speaking of gold standard, I noticed that you would like to go back to your experiences a lot, like about your past, about your family and stuff. So I want to know a little about your life at school. Were you like a good student?
Yeah, that's really neat. I was, my parents kind of packaged me as a good student, and they very kindly thought that I was. And so I say that with a, kind of facetiously. I was a pretty good student.
Okay.
Sometimes I was a great student. I was probably a bit of a high variance student, which some people in education would say means you didn't always do your homework, right? I liked studying, I liked learning, I had a fairly good brain, so I could do okay, and I could get into a school like ours, probably just barely. Not so sure I'd get into co-op BBA today with those marks. But I did have to learn process. So being a student means a lot of things. And among the most important is good process. And I even teach study process to the students who will listen.
Right.
And I really, by about third year in university, I wasn't feeling like I was achieving everything I should be. And I really had to rethink how I approached studying. And I did. I developed a whole new approach. And by fourth year in grad school, I was getting it done. And it felt so good.
Yeah, that makes sense. And in your experience, I'm pretty sure you have seen a lot of businesses go from level 0 to level 20, but I'm pretty sure you have seen many who went from level 0 to -20, -30.
Sure.
So how important would you say is being a good student to building a successful business? Do grades play even a slight impact in that?
Yeah, that's really neat because I think there's math behind this, but certainly there's a lot of anecdote, which is the classic entrepreneur. Again, you don't find them in class. It's like, where are you? And you're chasing them for their papers and stuff like that because they're busy building. They have this passion and desire to make things happen from 0 to 1, as we say, not from 1 to 100, right? So the 0 to 1 people do have this kind of packaging that people seem to notice about them, which is they're not the greatest students. Because they have this other thing on their souls. And it's an amazing phenomenon. A lot of them are terribly bright. Sometimes they're not book bright as much as some. They're all pretty bright humans, but compared to some of the ones that we all know, probably the two of you, amazing students in the classic sense. So entrepreneurs don't necessarily follow that perfect student model. And I think we all kind of get it.
Okay, so you would say that it's a matter of priorities rather than intellect.
I do. I would say priorities for sure. And then intellect is an interesting thing. I think we overdo this notion of learning styles, and I think some of the science isn't really there, but backing up some of the claims of that stuff. But I do think there's some people who are just better suited to learn by doing, Others are just quite happy with pure intellectual conceptualization learning. And so the learning by doing, I suspect there's a high correlation with the entrepreneur community.
Right.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
You've guided many students to create successful businesses. What is one thing that you might have noticed that is not taught in universities or schools that is valuable to a successful entrepreneur?
Yeah, that's neat.
That's especially interesting considering you're an entrepreneurship professor.
Yeah, no kidding, huh? So where am I failing, you're asking? Thanks. So interestingly, I was having this chat even this morning about this notion of judgment. Developing good judgment. Right? Some people worry about that word because, no one wants people to be judgy. I don't want to judge you for whether I think you're a good enough person to do it. Right. But judgment matters fundamentally. Discerning. Decision making. And at the end of the day, other than your hard work, I don't know what else really you have. And so I think stressing this notion for all of us, not to mention entrepreneurs, that your judgment is almost paramount, and just believing that first of all. When we say, well, I'm coming to bring awareness about a certain topic, right? Because once you have awareness, then you start thinking about it and whether it fits and how your life fits into this topic. The notion of judgment, that there's no one else is there. And the entrepreneur, I think, with the entrepreneur, it's maybe just on display more than anything because it's that lonely little space where it might be just you or a very small team. It's not back at IBM where I had 313,000 colleagues and a whole bunch of managers, right, describing or framing what I'm supposed to do and even kind of very much weighing in on, my decisions. It's just you.
That makes sense.
And so developing your judgment, recognizing that that's it, that and your effort. And I think that's something that I'd like to help our community develop a greater consciousness of.
Right. So would you say anyone who can do those things well can become an entrepreneur?
I do. I suppose one thing that I left off that little model of effort and judgment is motivation.
Right.
So I suppose there's some areas of motivation we might have to throw in there before I say just, who's likely to be a successful entrepreneur. Yeah.
That makes sense. So the way I put it is you almost need a mixture of the modern day human and the caveman, where the modern day human has the judgment, but the caveman is still hammering down things and still experimenting.
Right on. Like I think so. And keeps going because they got to eat, right? They're not going to go, I don't know about this today.
That's the motivation part.
Right. Right on.
That's perfect.
So it kind of relates to this whole notion of objectivity.
Yeah.
Again, so, you know, I used to think I was a great student, probably because my parents were just so gushy about me. I realized, no, I'm a good student, right? So developing objectivity, being open to getting more feedback, and then developing a deeper sense of, okay, I want to get to know myself better.
Okay.
This is how we do this. Not sure. Not sure. Again, if you look at the motivation and some of the other capacities, you know, as there's a movie Ratatouille that says, you know, not everyone can be a great chef, but a great chef can come from anywhere.
Yeah.
And I kind of think the same thing about entrepreneurship.
Okay.
Well, I think in the early days, if you're an early stage, if you're a young entrepreneur, it's not absolutely necessary.
Okay.
But I think many will need that training, the maturation, and the network to give it a go. I'd probably start investing earlier.
Okay.
Once I started developing a bit of wealth, I started analyzing things, developing my own investment strategies. But I think I was just a little slow to the. I mean, I've been doing it for years, but I think, frankly, I asked myself, I go, why wait?
Yeah.
So I think I'd start that earlier. And why? Because back to the time value of money.
All right. That's it. Thank you so much.
That's all
for
very
our
Very good.
podcast.
Hey, real
Thank you very
pleasure.
much.
Very happy to be your first guinea pig.
Pleasure.
Yeah, and great meeting you.